Ethan Carter pulled into the driveway of his meticulously maintained suburban haven, a property he'd transformed into a personal sanctuary after years of military service. Now a respected city official by day and a dedicated restorer of classic cars by night, Ethan had built his life around order, passion, and the freedom to pursue his hobbies without bureaucratic interference. His home, nestled among tree-lined streets and well-kept lawns, was more than bricks and mortar. It was a testament to the American dream and his hard-won independence. In the spacious two-car garage, beside his prized 1965 Mustang, Ethan kept not only his restoration projects, but also the memories of a life defined by honor and discipline. On an unusually bright morning, as he unlocked the front door, Ethan was met by a presence as unwelcome as it was expected. There, in the center of his meticulously trimmed lawn, stood Kerren, the self-appointed queen of the neighborhood's Homeowners Association, HOA. With her impeccably styled hair and a clipboard clutched like a scepter of authority, Kerren's glare was as sharp as the crisp lines of her tailored blazer. As the designated HOA president, she prided herself on enforcing every rule to the letter, no matter how trivial. Today, her eyes were fixed on the soft glow of Ethan's outdoor lights, which she declared too bright for the community's refined standards. "Ethan," she said, her tone a blend of condescension and self-satisfaction, "I'm afraid your porch lights are in direct violation of our community's aesthetic guidelines. Consider this your final warning." Ethan, who had never subscribed to the arbitrary demands of the HOA, merely raised an eyebrow. "Final warning?" he echoed. "I was never consulted on these so-called rules." His voice was calm yet firm, a reflection of the confidence built over years of service and the clarity of his convictions. Kerren's eyes narrowed as she stepped closer, her voice growing sharper. "The rules apply to everyone. You're not above the community standards simply because you serve the city. It's about order, Ethan." Behind her, a couple of fellow board members lingered, their expressions a mix of duty and sycophancy. Ethan's property, his cherished retreat, and the living space for his personal passions, suddenly felt under siege by the forces of entitlement. As Ethan stepped onto his porch, the conversation escalated into a standoff. "I appreciate the need for community standards," he began, "but these arbitrary dictates aren't what made this neighborhood a sanctuary for me. I value my independence and my property, especially the garage where my family's legacy rides on wheels." His mention of the garage wasn't lost on Kerren, whose eyes flickered with barely concealed irritation. "I assure you, Ethan, we all follow the same rules," she snapped. "You will comply, or consequences will follow." The tension in the air was palpable. Neighbors peeking from behind curtains wondered if the peaceful aura of their community had finally cracked. For Ethan, this confrontation wasn't just about a pair of porch lights. It was the first sign of an all-out war against an overreaching HOA. Kerren's smug posture and unwavering tone hinted at battles to come, a clash of personal freedom against institutional tyranny. And in that moment, Ethan silently vowed to defend his home, his garage, and his right to live by his own rules, no matter how high the fines or how harsh the warnings became. With the echoes of Kerren's final warning hanging in the air, Ethan retreated inside, already mentally preparing for the bureaucratic storm that was about to descend on him. The stage was set, and the first sparks of a long, bitter conflict were flying. The following morning, Ethan's routine was shattered when he opened his front door to discover an official envelope taped firmly to it. Inside, a hefty $750 fine for violating community light regulations glared at him in stark black print. His stomach churned with disbelief. This was no isolated misunderstanding, but an orchestrated move by the HOA to force compliance. Outside, Kerren stood on the sidewalk, arms crossed, and a look of satisfied superiority plastered on her face. "Good morning, Ethan," she said coolly, as if delivering a daily weather report. "I trust you received our notice. The rules apply to everyone, and noncompliance has consequences." Ethan took a deep breath and retorted, "I was never made aware of these regulations when I moved in. As a city official, I know these standards are subjective at best." His words were measured, designed to challenge the notion that the HOA's diktats held any weight beyond Kerren's own inflated sense of duty. Within hours, the storm gathered force. Anonymous complaints began to pour into the HOA's email, each alleging minor infractions on Ethan's part. Complaints that bore the unmistakable hallmarks of orchestrated sabotage. Before long, inspectors arrived, clipboards in hand, scrutinizing every corner of his property for any deviation from the ever-changing standards. The inspectors, caught between duty and sympathy, hesitated as they observed Ethan's immaculate upkeep and the tasteful glow of his lights. "Your property is in impeccable condition," one inspector admitted reluctantly. "But we must follow the HOA's directive." Kerren, watching from a distance with a self-satisfied smirk, made a show of addressing Ethan's every protest. "I'm simply enforcing the rules that everyone agreed to, rules that ensure our community's uniform appearance," she explained, her tone laced with arrogance. Frustrated yet undeterred, Ethan contacted the local zoning office. Armed with knowledge of municipal codes and evidence of the inconsistent application of rules, he submitted a formal complaint. Yet even as he navigated the labyrinth of local regulations, Kerren and her minions moved swiftly, determined to impose their authority by any means necessary. Every knock on his door, every unexpected visit from inspectors, amplified the sense of an unjust siege. The fine became a symbol not only of bureaucratic overreach, but of a personal vendetta led by Kerren's relentless pursuit of control. Each time Ethan argued his case, Kerren's retort was as icy as it was unyielding. "We're merely upholding community standards." In the midst of this chaos, Ethan began to realize that his struggle was not just with a set of rules, but with an entire system that thrived on intimidation and selective enforcement. The fine was merely the first power move, a message from the HOA that defiance would be met with consequences. And as the sun dipped below the horizon that day, casting long shadows over his once peaceful property, Ethan's determination to reclaim his home only grew stronger. The conflict escalated rapidly. What began as a dispute over porch lights transformed into a full-blown war waged by an overzealous HOA determined to impose its will at any cost. Kerren, emboldened by her previous successes, began employing increasingly aggressive tactics. One afternoon, a stern letter arrived at Ethan's door, not just another fine, but a notice warning him of potential eviction and even property seizure. The language was legally intimidating, laden with threats that blurred the lines between civic duty and outright extortion. Ethan, who prided himself on being both a law-abiding citizen and a keen observer of municipal regulations, sensed that something was deeply amiss. His instincts told him that the fines alone, were a smokescreen for deeper corruption within the HOA. Over the next few days, whispers began circulating among the neighbors. A few brave souls confided in Ethan about their own run-ins with Kerren and the board members. "Kerren has always had a penchant for exaggeration," one neighbor murmured, "but now it feels like she's fabricating violations just to line her pockets." Determined to expose the truth, Ethan started gathering evidence. He installed discreet cameras around his property to document any irregularities, an action he knew might further provoke Kerren's ire. Within days, his recordings revealed disturbing patterns. In one clip, a board member could be seen pocketing what appeared to be part of the fines collected from homeowners. Another tape showed Kerren issuing warnings for imagined infractions, her tone growing more menacing with every word. At a secret midnight meeting with a few sympathetic board members, Ethan laid out his findings. "We're being manipulated," he asserted, holding up the incriminating footage. "Kerren isn't interested in community welfare. She's siphoning money and power for herself. We need to stand up before this tyranny consumes our neighborhood." Some board members shifted uncomfortably, caught between loyalty to the HOA's image and the undeniable evidence of wrongdoing. Their eyes revealed a quiet rebellion, a silent questioning of Kerren's authority. Emboldened by the support, Ethan meticulously compiled the evidence. He documented every fine, every illegal threat, every instance of misuse of HOA funds. His investigation was methodical, driven by a deep commitment to fairness and the preservation of his home's sanctity. As he pieced together the puzzle, It became evident that Kerren's actions were not isolated incidents, but part of a larger pattern of abuse. The HOA, under her rule, had transformed from a body meant to protect property values into an instrument of personal vendetta and greed. With his dossier in hand, Ethan prepared for his next move, a counterattack that would force Kerren's hand. He knew that exposing the corruption would not only vindicate him, but also liberate his neighbors from the shackles of an unjust regime. Even as the HOA continued to escalate its threats, the seeds of dissent were being sown among the residents. Rumors of hidden funds, secret meetings, and illicit practices spread like wildfire, fanning the flames of rebellion. In the midst of this unfolding drama, Ethan's personal haven was about to become a battleground. The cameras captured not just the misdeeds of the HOA, but also a growing sense of solidarity among the homeowners, a solidarity that promised to overturn the tyranny of Kerren and her cronies. The stage was set for a dramatic showdown, and Ethan knew that his carefully collected evidence would be the catalyst for change. It started with a peculiar discovery. As Ethan opened the door to his beloved garage one crisp morning, he was met with an unexpected sight. Amid the rows of meticulously maintained classic cars stood a vehicle that did not belong, a sleek, black sedan emblazoned with the unmistakable vanity of the HOA's rule enforcer. It was Kerren's car. Even more infuriating, the car had been parked inside his garage for an entire week without so much as a courtesy call. Ethan's heart pounded as he circled the vehicle, his mind racing. How could this be allowed? His garage wasn't just a storage space. It was a sacred repository of his legacy and hard work. The intrusion was a blatant violation of his privacy and a symbolic act of the HOA's overreach. The irony was not lost on him. The very person who prided herself on enforcing community standards had disrespected his property in the most personal of ways. That day, at the scheduled HOA meeting, Ethan walked in carrying a thick folder of evidence. The folder contained not only copies of the excessive fines and anonymous complaints, but also photographs and video stills of Kerren's car parked inside his garage. As he laid out his case before a room filled with uneasy board members and skeptical neighbors, a murmur rippled through the crowd. How could this happen? Someone whispered. Kerren attempted to dismiss the evidence with her trademark haughtiness. That car must have been misdirected by a tow truck error, she stammered. But her voice wavered under the weight of irrefutable proof. There's no plausible explanation for a vehicle to be left in someone's private garage without permission, Ethan countered, his tone icy. This isn't just a bureaucratic error. It's a deliberate act of intimidation. The tension in the room thickened. One board member, whose eyes betrayed a hint of moral conflict, tentatively asked, "Is this really in line with HOA policy?" Kerren's face flushed with indignation as she tried to maintain control of the narrative. But the damage was done. Neighbors began to murmur their discontent, and what had started as an attempt to bully Ethan now threatened to backfire spectacularly. Outside the meeting hall, word of the incident spread quickly. Neighbors who had once meekly accepted Kerren's overreaching authority now found themselves emboldened by Ethan's defiant stand. Some recounted similar experiences of unwarranted fines and arbitrary rules. The garage invasion had become a symbol, a rallying cry against the misuse of power. In the days that followed, the absurdity of the situation became undeniable. The once dignified rules of the HOA were now being questioned openly. Ethan took swift action. He contacted a reputable tow service and, with a mixture of righteous anger and cautious triumph, arranged for Kerren's car to be removed from his property. The tow truck's rumbling arrival was not just a service call. It was an act of reclaiming his space and dignity. As the car was hoisted onto the truck, Ethan couldn't help but feel that justice, in its own small way, had been served. This bold move was only the beginning. With the community rallying behind him, Ethan began circulating his evidence far and wide, on social media, in local newsletters, and at impromptu gatherings of outraged residents. Each retelling of the story chipped away at the once impenetrable facade of Kerren's authority. The incident had evolved from a personal affront to a public spectacle, a clear demonstration of how power abused can be met with equally determined resistance. Kerren, for her part, was cornered. In private, she fumed over the backlash, unable to reconcile her vision of order with the undeniable evidence of her intrusion. Publicly, she maintained a facade of calm, but every meeting, every board session was now tinged with an undercurrent of doubt about her leadership. Ethan's strike back was not only a reclamation of his property, but also a catalyst for a broader movement, a turning tide against an HOA that had long forgotten the very people it was meant to serve. Desperation breeds recklessness, and Kerren's next steps proved just that. In a last-ditch effort to reassert her crumbling authority, she escalated her campaign of intimidation to an entirely new level. One foggy evening, as the neighborhood settled into an uneasy quiet, Kerren made a call to the local police station. This time, her complaint was not about lighting or landscaping. It was a dramatic allegation that Ethan's vibrant porch lights were creating a public disturbance that disrupted the peace of the community. When officers arrived at Ethan's doorstep, their presence sparked an immediate confrontation. Ethan, cool and collected, greeted them with a nod, only to produce his city official badge when questioned. The officers, recognizing his credentials and the absurdity of Kerren's claim, exchanged exasperated looks. "This is nothing but a personal vendetta disguised as a public safety concern," one officer remarked as they left, clearly unimpressed by Kerren's desperate theatrics. But Kerren's desperation did not stop with police intervention. Determined to crush Ethan once and for all, she enlisted the help of a private investigator, someone with a reputation for digging up dirt, regardless of the cost to ethics or decency. Kerren hoped this shadowy figure could uncover any hint of impropriety in Ethan's past or present actions. However, in her haste, she underestimated the resolve of her target. Late one night, while Ethan reviewed his latest evidence on his computer, the security system caught a surprising intruder. On the grainy footage, a figure lurked near the garage, fiddling with the locks and trying to disable the cameras. Ethan's heart raced as he recognized the unmistakable outline of the private investigator. Without delay, he saved the recording and alerted his neighbors, many of whom had become vigilant in the wake of recent events. At the next HOA meeting, a crowded affair marked by simmering anger and anticipation, Ethan took center stage once again. This time he presented the damning footage, a clear, unedited clip of the investigators sneaking around his property, a blatant violation of privacy and a crime against the very spirit of community trust. The room fell silent as the evidence was laid bare. "This," Ethan said slowly, "is proof that Kerren is willing to stoop to any level, spying, trespassing, and breaking the law, to maintain her stranglehold on power." The impact was immediate and profound. Whispers of disbelief and outrage rippled through the assembly. Some residents recalled similar covert operations, a neighbor's security camera capturing suspicious activity near their own homes, hints that they too were being targeted. Kerren's already shaky position began to crumble further under the weight of public scrutiny. In a final bid to salvage her reputation, Kerren attempted to downplay the incident. "I only wanted to ensure the safety of our community," she insisted, her voice trembling as she addressed the assembly. But the evidence, now irrefutable and widely circulated, painted a starkly different picture. Safety. Ethan countered sharply. "This isn't safety, it's surveillance, intimidation, and abuse of power." As the meeting drew to a close, it was clear that the tide had turned irrevocably. Kerren's final desperate moves had only confirmed what many had suspected all along, that her leadership was built on fear and coercion. The public exposure of her tactics was a turning point, and the community's patience had worn dangerously thin. With every piece of evidence, every whispered conversation, and shared video, Kerren's once impenetrable facade was shattered beyond repair. In the wake of the explosive revelations, the community was no longer willing to tolerate tyranny masquerading as order. Meetings that once exuded forced civility now erupted with raw indignation. Neighbors, once intimidated into silence, now found their voices united in a chorus of dissent. The collective outrage was palpable, and it wasn't long before the residents decided that drastic measures were needed. A special meeting was called, a gathering that promised to reshape the future of the HOA. With Ethan's dossier of evidence in hand and the community's support echoing through every whispered conversation, the meeting room quickly filled with determined homeowners. The agenda was simple: to remove Kerren from power and dismantle the corrupt structure that had enabled her abuse. After hours of impassioned debate, heated testimonies, and the presentation of irrefutable evidence, the vote was cast. In a dramatic turn of events, the community overwhelmingly voted to expel Kerren from the HOA board. The final tally was a resounding mandate for change, a public repudiation of the tyrannical practices that had long plagued the neighborhood. Simultaneously, local authorities, spurred on by the mounting evidence and public outcry, launched a full-scale investigation into the HOA's practices. It soon emerged that the corruption was systemic. Funds had been misappropriated, fines levied without proper authority, and board members complicit in upholding a regime built on fear. The investigation culminated in substantial fines being imposed on the HOA and a cascade of legal actions that threatened to dissolve the entire organization. In the midst of the chaos, Kerren's personal life began to unravel. With her leadership revoked and her reputation in tatters, she found herself isolated. Her once proud home became the subject of scrutiny, and rumors spread that it would soon be sold off as part of the cleanup. One quiet morning, while sipping coffee on his now peaceful porch, Ethan read the news with a wry smile. Kerren's residence was listed for sale overnight, a final nail in the coffin of her authority. For Ethan, the victory was bittersweet. He had fought not only for his rights, but for the dignity and autonomy of every resident in the community. His well-earned triumph was celebrated by neighbors who had long felt oppressed, and the saga of the infamous garage invasion, where Kerren's car had symbolically invaded his personal space, became a rallying cry for accountability and justice. The once dreaded HOA had crumbled under the weight of its own corruption, and in its place, a new era of transparency and community-driven governance began to take shape. Ethan's victory was not merely personal. It was emblematic of a broader reclaiming of neighborhood power, a reminder that when the people stand together, no tyrant can hold sway indefinitely. In the months following Kerren's expulsion, the legal ramifications for the HOA unfolded swiftly. With a trove of evidence in hand, affected homeowners joined forces with Ethan to file a class action lawsuit against the HOA. The case centered on the unlawful fines, the illegal surveillance, and the systematic abuse of power that had long been ignored behind closed doors. Local authorities, unable to turn a blind eye any longer, imposed substantial fines on the HOA for violating municipal codes and abusing its regulatory authority. As the lawsuit progressed, more board members found themselves in the crosshairs of legal investigations. Several were called to testify about their roles in facilitating the misuse of funds and the orchestrated harassment of residents. The legal proceedings were complex and painstaking, but the resolve of the community never wavered. Ethan emerged as a leading figure in the proceedings, his meticulous documentation and unwavering dedication serving as a beacon for justice. "This isn't about one person," he declared during a community rally. "It's about restoring our right to live freely, without fear of arbitrary punishment." Court hearings became public spectacles, drawing attention from local media and civic watchdog groups. As the case gained momentum, it sent shockwaves through other communities grappling with similar issues. The courtroom battles, though arduous, slowly began to tip the scales in favor of the homeowners. When the final verdict was handed down, it was a resounding blow against the corrupt practices of the HOA. Not only were the fines upheld, but the board was ordered to reimburse every homeowner for the illegal charges imposed over the years. Some board members even faced the threat of criminal charges for their involvement in the fraudulent practices. The legal consequences, it seemed, were finally catching up with the institution that had once ruled by fear. In the end, the collapse of the HOA's old guard marked the beginning of a new chapter, one where transparency, accountability, and community empowerment took center stage. Ethan's final power move was to ensure that the lessons learned from this ordeal would never be forgotten. He spearheaded initiatives to draft clearer, fairer community guidelines and oversaw the creation of an independent oversight committee to prevent future abuses. Kerren's fall from grace was as public as it was humiliating. Once the iron-fisted enforcer of the HOA's ridiculous regulations, she now found herself stripped of power and isolated in a community that once feared her. With her expulsion from the board, her influence evaporated overnight. No longer able to hide behind official channels, her every misstep was laid bare for the public to scrutinize. In the weeks that followed, rumors of her personal and financial ruin circulated like wildfire. Her car, the same vehicle that had once invaded Ethan's garage, became a symbol of her downfall when it was repossessed by a bank amid mounting debts. The scandal reached a crescendo when her estranged husband filed for divorce, citing her unethical conduct and the toll it had taken on their lives. At City Hall, Kerren's attempts to salvage her reputation crumbled as she argued feebly against fines and penalties that now seemed inevitable. Public records and news articles painted a damning portrait of a woman who had exploited her position for personal gain. Every public appearance only added to the narrative of disgrace. One fateful day, Ethan encountered Kerren unexpectedly at a local real estate office. She had landed a new job, an assistant property manager for another HOA. The irony was too much to bear. As they crossed paths in the sterile, fluorescent-lit lobby, Ethan couldn't resist a parting remark. With a cool smile, he said, "I hope you enjoy following the rules from now on." His words, though gentle, carried the weight of poetic justice, a final, satisfying punctuation mark on her long reign of terror. For Kerren, the humiliation was total. Once a self-styled arbiter of community standards, she was now reduced to a cautionary tale, a reminder that power wielded without accountability is doomed to fail. Her personal downfall was complete, and the community, having reclaimed its dignity, moved forward with a sense of collective relief and triumph. In the aftermath of the tumult, the neighborhood began to breathe again. The oppressive shadow of the old HOA had finally lifted, replaced by a renewed sense of community and purpose. Ethan often spent his evenings on the porch, now unburdened by the constant threat of arbitrary fines and authoritarian rule. Neighbors gathered on cool evenings, sharing stories and laughter about the bizarre events that had once torn the fabric of their community apart. One sunny afternoon, as Ethan relaxed with a cup of coffee and a contented smile, a young neighbor approached him. In a playful gesture that spoke volumes about how far things had come, the neighbor handed him a mock HOA violation notice, this time for excessive coolness. Ethan chuckled, shaking his head as he read the note. "They really tried," he murmured, a hint of mischief in his eyes. The final mic drop moment came unexpectedly. During a community potluck, while residents reminisced about the days of terror under Kerren's rule, someone raised a toast to the newfound freedom. The conversation flowed from humorous recollections of the infamous garage incident to genuine expressions of hope for the future. In that moment, the neighborhood was more than just a collection of houses. It was a resilient community that had fought back and emerged stronger. Ethan's journey from reluctant homeowner to a champion of justice had inspired many. The ordeal, though painful and prolonged, had forged bonds among neighbors who had learned the importance of standing together against injustice. And as the sun set on that memorable day, the once dreaded warnings and fines faded into distant memories, replaced by the warm glow of community spirit. In the end, the legacy of that turbulent chapter was not one of bitterness, but of triumph, a living reminder that when entitlement goes unchecked, the collective will of ordinary people can reclaim what truly matters: the right to live, laugh, and prosper in a home they can call their own. Fade to black.